They were once known across the galaxy as one of the most peaceful and cooperative species. Their forms, towering and graceful, carried an air of gentleness that made them highly valued as diplomats and negotiators. They approached every conflict with patience, their long antennae twitching in contemplation rather than aggression. For centuries, they thrived on peaceful coexistence, making allies wherever they went, earning the trust of those who sought a more harmonious galaxy. It was in this spirit that the Terran Republic first encountered them. Humanity, still relatively young on the galactic stage, saw them as a rare kindred spirit, a species that favored cooperation over conquest, when that sought understanding over dominance. First contact was smooth, an unusual circumstance given humanity's tumultuous introductions to other galactic species. Ever the skilled negotiators, spoke in carefully measured tones, their mandibles clicking softly as they expressed an earnest desire to exchange knowledge, culture, and trade. The Terran delegation, wary from past experiences, was skeptical at first, but the sincerity of the could not be ignored. Initial trade agreements were drawn up with ease, and humanity found itself with an ally that genuinely wanted mutual growth. As cultural exchanges took root, humanity marveled at the way of life. Their cities, built within the vast underground chambers of their, buzzed with activity yet retained a tranquility that was rare among such a populous species. They lived with purpose but without the burden of greed or selfish ambition. Art, philosophy, and diplomacy flourished, and their belief that any conflict could be resolved through understanding became an admired principle. For humanity, who had struggled with war and internal strife for centuries, this was both inspiring and humbling. Over time, interactions flourished. Terran scientists and scholars worked side by side, exchanging technological advances and philosophical insights. Human engineers were amazed at the organic technology of the structures that grew rather than being built, their bioluminescent patterns serving as both functional and aesthetic designs. Meanwhile, they marveled at humanity's relentless ingenuity, their ability to adapt to any environment, their fearless push into the unknown. Despite their differences, the two species found common ground in unexpected ways. When a small human settlement on the edge of Terran space suffered a catastrophic environmental collapse, it was they who responded first. Their crisis teams, trained in disaster relief and mediation, worked tirelessly to stabilize the region, their medical expertise saving countless lives. In return, human emergency response teams assisted when a seismic shift threatened one of the underground capitals, deploying advanced stabilization technology that prevented a catastrophic collapse. It was a partnership built on trust, an alliance that seemed unshakable. But peace is fragile, and sometimes, even the kindest souls can be pushed too far. They had never experienced true exploitation, had never known the sting of betrayal. They had always believed that negotiations could solve any dispute, that dialogue could mend any fracture. That belief would soon be tested in ways they could not have foreseen. What began as an era of shared prosperity would eventually become a lesson in the harsh realities of the widened galaxy, a galaxy that did not always value peace, that did not always reward kindness. And as they would soon learn, not all alliances were built with good intentions. The trouble began when the corporate entities of the Galactic Trade Syndicate saw an opportunity. They, rich in rare minerals and untapped resources, became the target of a calculated and ruthless economic takeover. Unlike the Terran Republic, which valued its alliance with the Syndicate viewed them not as allies, but as assets. Their peaceful nature, their unwavering faith in diplomacy, made them easy targets for those who operated without conscience. What started as a series of trade agreements soon spiraled into something far more insidious. The Syndicate flooded the markets with promises of wealth and prosperity. Contracts drawn up in convoluted legal jargon ensured that they were given lucrative opportunities to harvest their own resources and sell them for what seemed to be fair compensation. However, the fine print dictated otherwise. The corporations owned the rights to all exports. They, trusting as they were, signed away their sovereignty without realizing the implications. It was not until it was too late that they saw the trap closing around them. The economy became a slave to the galactic market, their people forced into endless labor to meet quotas they had never agreed to. At first, they tried to negotiate, believing that reason would prevail. Delegations were sent to the syndicate's governing council, pleading for fairer terms, for adjustments that would allow their people to survive. They were met with cold indifference. Bureaucrats drowned their requests in endless layers of legal loopholes, their words carefully crafted to stall any real action. As the conditions worsened, so too did the desperation of the workers. Families were separated, entire generations bound to contracts that ensured they would never taste the prosperity they had been promised. Humanity watched, horrified but unable to intervene through official channels. The Terran Republic had its own limitations, bound by intergalactic laws that prevented military involvement in what was, legally speaking, an economic dispute. But the Terran people? They were not bound by such red tape. Independent operators, smugglers, mercenaries, and rogue traders began working in the shadows to support the. They smuggled in supplies, provided covert transport for those who sought to escape, and most importantly, started teaching a lesson they had never before considered: how to fight back. It was a difficult transition. They had spent generations believing that conflict could be avoided, that violence was never the answer. But as the oppression deepened, as they watched their people suffer while their oppressors grew richer, something within them shifted. Small acts of defiance began to emerge. Equipment would mysteriously malfunction. Shipments would go missing. Syndicate enforcers found themselves facing resistance in places that had once been docile. And all the while, the humans who had taken the end on their wing continued to push them further. It was an old Terran veteran, a former Marine named Grant Holloway, who taught the first group of workers how to organize. He had seen the horrors of war, had fought in battles where he had lost friends, but he also knew what it meant to fight for something greater. When he looked at he did not see weaklings, he saw a people who had never been given the tools to stand up for themselves. And so he trained them. He taught them how to move unseen, how to disable security systems, how to strike where it hurt the most. It was a brutal lesson for a species that had never known aggression, but when they embraced out of necessity. Soon resistance cells formed across the territories. The workers, once compliant and fearful, became something new. They were no longer mere laborers. They were revolutionaries. The first real blow came when a massive shipment of harvested minerals never arrived at its destination. The syndicate sent enforcers to investigate, only to find an entire facility abandoned, its machinery sabotaged beyond repair. Across multiple star systems, similar incidents unfolded. They had learned that diplomacy had failed them, and now they had another option. The syndicate, realizing the gravity of what was happening, responded with force. Armed patrols were increased, punishment became harsher, and entire settlements were locked down in an attempt to quell the uprising. But the more they cracked down, the harder they fought back. The syndicate had made one fatal miscalculation. They had assumed they were too weak to resist. They had never considered what would happen if an entire species, once peaceful, learned the ways of war. It was only a matter of time before the conflict reached a breaking point. And when it did, the galaxy would witness the transformation of from negotiators to warriors. They had always believed in diplomacy, in discussion, in finding a middle ground. But humans knew another truth: sometimes, words were not enough. Outraged by the syndicate's treatment of their allies, Terran citizens began helping in ways that were less than legal. Smugglers and trained workers in guerrilla tactics. Retired Marines showed them how to resist, how to fight, how to stand up for themselves. It was an uncomfortable lesson for but when they learned quickly. The next time the syndicate sent enforcers to discipline their workers, they were met with ambushes, strikes, and sabotage. They had changed, and it was humanity that had shown them how. At first, the syndicate dismissed the resistance as an isolated nuisance. A few missing shipments, a few broken machines, but nothing significant. However, the resistance did not stop. It spread. Entire mining operations were abandoned overnight, workers vanishing into the underground networks they had created with human assistance. Syndicate patrols started disappearing, their transports found wrecked and stripped of supplies. What had once been a peaceful, docile species had now become something else, something dangerous. As they adapted to warfare, their methods evolved. Humans had taught them to strike where it hit the most: supply lines, key infrastructure, communications. The syndicate, for all its power, was built on efficiency and profit, and the resistance made them bleed money. With every lost shipment, with every delayed operation, the corporate overlords felt the sting. They sent more security, upgraded their enforcers with better weapons, but it was too late. They had learned the art of asymmetrical warfare, and no amount of firepower could counteract a species that knew the terrain better than their oppressors. The battle was no longer just about survival. It became something more. They were no longer defending themselves, they were reclaiming what was theirs. They stopped hiding in tunnels and launched open attacks on syndicate compounds. They raided supply depots and redistributed resources to struggling workers. They didn't just fight, they won. And the more they won, the more they inspired others to rise up. The syndicate had made the mistake of thinking they would always be prey. Now they had become the hunters. The Terran Republic, still bound by galactic law, could not openly support the rebellion, but that did not stop them from providing indirect aid. Civilian organizations smuggled weapons and supplies under the guise of humanitarian missions. Human volunteers, once private contractors, joined the ranks, fighting alongside them as comrades rather than saviors. It was a war fought in the shadows, but its impact echoed across the stars. Then the turning point came. The syndicate, desperate to regain control, declared martial law on the. They brought in warships, deployed air-orbiter bombardments on key locations, and issued an ultimatum: surrender or be exterminated. It was a mistake. The once a people who would have negotiated, who would have sought compromise, now had no intention of yielding. They had suffered too much, lost too much. The only option now was victory. Across the planets, resistance legions rallied their forces. They struck first, hitting syndicate warships before they could fully deploy. Using tactics, they forced the enemy into prolonged battles where the syndicate's superior firepower meant nothing in the face of endless ambushes and sabotage. Every inch of land, every supply route, every mining colony became a battleground where they and their human allies fought side by side. The final battle was not one of soldiers, but of sheer will. The syndicate, unable to secure its assets and bleeding credits with every engagement, finally cracked. Investors pulled out. Corporate executives abandoned their posts. The war had become unprofitable, and in the end, that was all that mattered to them. The syndicate, which had exploited countless worlds, had been brought to its knees not by another empire, but by those they had once deemed harmless. As the last syndicate warships fled the system, a new dawn rose over the people who had once only known peace had fought for their freedom and won. And they had learned something invaluable along the way. They would never let this happen again. They would never be weak again. They had changed forever, and it was humanity that had shown them the path to survival. The universe had just witnessed the birth of something new, a species that could negotiate with kindness, but fight with fury if pushed too far. The war was over. But for the real journey had only just begun. With their newfound strength, they broke free of their chains. They took control of their planets, cast out their oppressors, and declared their independence. But something fundamental had shifted. The gentle species that once relied on diplomacy alone had now learned the power of defiance. They were no longer just mediators, they were warriors. And as they took to the stars, many of them found a new calling, traveling alongside humans as mercenaries, explorers, and freedom fighters. The galaxy had changed, and so had they. They used to be so nice. And then they met humanity. For the first time in their history, they began looking outward, beyond their liberated. They had won their war against the Syndicate, but the scars of that struggle remained. They understood now that peace, true peace, required vigilance. No longer content with isolation, they sought alliances, bolstered their defenses, and studied warfare with an intensity that few had expected from their kind. Many among them refused to simply return to a quiet life. They had fought too hard, lost too much. The fire that had been ignited could not simply be put out. And so, when the Terran Republic extended an invitation to integrate some of their forces into joint operations, they did not hesitate. Mercenaries soon became highly sought after, their mix of strategic intelligence and newfound combat prowess making them formidable allies in conflicts across the galaxy. Many chose to travel with human crews, serving as tactical advisors, pilots, and even frontline soldiers. The first time a unit deployed alongside Terran Marines, the galaxy took notice. Their precision, their discipline, and their absolute refusal to surrender made them invaluable. Enemies expecting the old, the kind and passive diplomats, were caught off guard when faced with warriors who fought with ruthless efficiency. They had adapted, and the universe would never see them the same way again. But not all of them chose war. Some took to the stars as explorers, eager to understand the widened galaxy they had once ignored. They traveled with human trade caravans, diplomatic fleets, and scientific missions, learning and teaching in equal measure. Their experiences had hardened them, but they had not forgotten their roots. They still valued knowledge and dialogue. They simply no longer believed that words alone were enough. If a deal went bad, they were ready for more than just negotiations. For those who stayed behind, rebuilding there became the new challenge. The Syndicate had left deep wounds, entire cities had been stripped for resources, industries had been twisted to serve foreign markets, and countless families had been shattered by the years of oppression. But they were no longer passive victims of fate. They took control of their economy, created new laws that would prevent outside influence from ever subjugating them again, and rebuilt stronger than before. The Terran Republic provided aid, but only as equals, never as rulers. Humanity had helped free them, but they made it clear they would never be beholden to anyone again. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Galactic Trade Syndicate scattered into the world. Some of their executives tried to reclaim old holdings, but they pursued them relentlessly. They had learned a new lesson. Mercy was not always an option. Those who had enslaved their people, who had treated them as little more than tools for profit, were hunted down and dealt with. Some surrendered, some disappeared into the shadows of lawless peace, and some made desperate pleas for protection from the very governments that had once ignored their crimes. Justice was swift and absolute. The rest of the galaxy watched the transformation of with very respect. Other species, especially those who had been weaker players on the galactic stage, took inspiration from their struggle. Rebellions against corporate overlords and authoritarian regimes began to rise in other parts of the universe, and whispers of the revolution spread far beyond the systems they called home. The legend of the species that had learned to fight carried weight in diplomatic discussions and military councils alike. They had become a symbol of what happened when the oppressed refused to remain silent. As the years passed, they and the Terran Republic remained close allies, bound not just by treaties but by shared experiences. Humanity had given them the tools to fight, but they had shaped their own destiny. They were no longer the naive idealists who believed diplomacy could solve every problem, but neither had they become mindless warriors who sought conquest. They had found balance, a people who could negotiate with wisdom but wield a blade when needed. And so as ships spread further into the stars, as their warriors walked among Terrans and other species alike, a quiet understanding settled into the hearts of those who knew their story. They used to be so nice. And then they met humanity. And now they would never be underestimated again.